Okay, peeps, welcome back. So today we're going to be talking about Bitcoin and what to expect going forward with Bitcoin. So with that being said, let's get it. All right, so we're on the Bitcoin chart, but as you guys know, we typically go over the chart last. So let's go ahead and go over the portfolio. So I want to show you guys here that the portfolio is still the same. Okay, all the altcoins that are in here are still the same. So Filecoin, AIOZ, Horizon, which is up 19%. I don't know what the heck is going on with Horizon. I'm gonna have to look into that. Dash, Render, Banker, Crypto.com, Ethereum, Scale, Zcash, Engine, Litecoin. These are all down massively, by the way. Reason why money hasn't been put into this yet is because I'm just simply looking for a bottom here. Okay. So I'm looking for a bottom on Bitcoin. The goal here is to kind of be strategic because of the uncertainty. Plus, we got CPI coming up at the end of the week. If that's bad, then you can be sure that the markets and crypto are probably going to dump some more. So we're kind of looking for a reversal entry here. And just show you guys what the portfolio looks like over the course of a day. So it's moved about $300 and some over the course of a day. 1 week, you guys can see this is pretty extreme. So it went from 8,400 to 6,700. That's about a $1,700 move, I believe. So, I mean, a lot of people that are subscribed to this channel are familiar with crypto and the volatility thereof. But if you are not, I would not blame you for not wanting to buy any crypto because it can be very nerve-wracking watching these numbers go up and down so much. I've been doing this for a very long time, so I'm pretty much used to it at this point. I've also been through an entire bull and bear cycle. So you could essentially say that I've pretty much become numb to the movements of crypto. It doesn't really bother me so much. I'm just kind of like, yeah, whatever. Bitcoin's up 10,000, Bitcoin's down 10,000. Who cares, right? It's not that I don't care about making money or losing money. It's just that, it's just been analyzing charts for so long that it's just kind of second nature at this point. So, crypto, the 5-year search term on Google Trends, you guys can see that it's sitting pretty low even compared to the previous peak here. So the crypto search term is for crypto in general. That includes Bitcoin and all altcoins. You guys can see on Bitcoin's previous peak, it was at a 33. So it was a little up there, but as you guys know, the major peaks of the last bull cycle was at a 70 and 100 on the 5-year time frame. So in my opinion, by this metric, we are still early and nowhere near the actual true cycle peak. Same thing with Bitcoin. So you guys can see Bitcoin is pretty much ranging between like 20 to 30, somewhere in there. So we had some little blips here. Bitcoin during its most previous peak was at 50. But once again, I will reiterate on the last two major Bitcoin cycle tops. We were at like 100 and then a 75. So, I mean, we're sitting at a 23 right now. As you guys can see, that's nothing compared to where we were before. So again, once again, I do think we're early. I'll give you guys my expectations of what I expect to happen over the next 6 to 12 months with Bitcoin once we get to the charts. So fear and greed, I did tell you guys it was probably going to range between 50 to 100 for a while. Generally speaking, when we do get a major pullback, this does happen. It will swing all the way to the opposite end into the fear spectrum, which is where we're at right now. Usually when this thing is in fear, so long as structure levels on Bitcoin are being held, it usually indicates a dip buying opportunity. So, I mean, just based on the fear number alone, I mean, that screams major discounts on crypto coins. So MVRV, this thing is kind of pulling back a little bit, which is not really shocking. I mean, Bitcoin went from 15,000 to 75,000 in a very short period of time. So I would expect some kind of pullback. Usually we look for some kind of top or getting close to one of these pink zones as a potential, okay, now it's time to get the hell out kind of signal. We haven't seen one of these yet, so we're not super cheap, but not super expensive. Once again, that would indicate to me that I don't think, based on looking at this, that this is actually the true top. So Bitcoin rainbow chart. Again, don't really care about the rainbow piece. It just so happens to be what the chart is. So pretty much what we're looking at here on the chart is that this thing is now in the buy territory after a pullback. It was in, if I'm not mistaken, it was in accumulate before. Now we're in buy. So again, Bitcoin is quite a bit cheaper than it was. I've told you guys before that I think that when this thing does top out, likely it probably will hit somewhere between the I would probably have to say somewhere between still cheap to hodl territory when we get a peak. It's hard to say exactly what that number is. I would assume that that's going to be somewhere between $150,000 to $250,000 Bitcoin. The reason why I say it's going to probably stop somewhere between this light green and this yellow shade, as you guys can see here going into the future, is because every single time we had a major peak on Bitcoin, you can see it was outside of the chart here, and then we topped out in the red here. And then in the previous cycle, we topped out in basically the medium orange colors, so FOMO intensifies. And then the second peak, we kind of just barely hit, is this a bubble? So in theory, if these peaks are getting lower and lower and lower on this kind of regressive band looking thing here, then it would be reasonable to assume it's probably going to top out somewhere between still cheap and hodl. Okay. So Nupal, this one's pretty self-explanatory. So we're getting pretty close to the euphoria greed area. Generally speaking, when we get anywhere in between, as you guys can see, just about to get to euphoria and greed or actually get into euphoria and greed, that is usually a bull market cycle top. So we've gotten pretty close to that. What I will say is this is not a perfect indicator, okay? So we got a peak here, but you can see this was a double peak. So the black line is Bitcoin, just so y'all know. So you can see BTC price is the black line. Blue line is basically the Nupal chart. So early on in Bitcoin's history, we got this big, huge peak here, and it did hit the pink box, but then it actually had a second peak, okay? So just because it gets into belief and denial, euphoria, and greed does not mean that this thing's actually topped out. As you guys can see, on multiple peaks throughout the 2017 cycle, it did hit into belief, denial, euphoria, greed many, many times before topping out. We even had this mini bull market where it went into the orange box and then came back down during the pandemic and then blasted off to the moon back into the orange box. But even when it hit the orange box, it still wasn't the true cycle peak. True cycle peak was in November. So I would say maybe some kind of mid-cycle pullback, and then we see a bigger high on Bitcoin towards the end of the year. So Pi cycle top indicator, we have gotten below the yellow band here, which is at currently 65,000. So the green band is at 93,000. Price currently 58,000. So we'll go over this more in depth in the chart, but the thesis, or basically the synopsis of what I'd like to show you here, is that generally speaking, we do not have a major cycle peak on Bitcoin unless these two lines converge, okay? So the yellow line at least has to touch and or cross over the green line in order for us to have some kind of cycle peak. As you guys can see, it literally nailed the top every single cycle prior, with the exception of the November peak in 2021. That was the only oddity on this indicator. But the other thing I want to point out here is that even though we did get below the yellow band, not every single time has led to a bear market. So I want to go back in history here so you guys can see, like right here, we kind of got below it when Bitcoin was just a few dollars. We got below it, even though it was actually the start of this bull market. It came below and then took off to the upside, okay? And then after this first peak, we did dip below it again when Bitcoin was less than $100. But then even though it came below both indicators, it actually took off again to the upside for a second peak. So as you guys can see, we have a true low back here on this cycle. And then even though we did get a higher low here, it did dip below the yellow EMA in this case, or DMA. I'm not sure what a DMA is. It doesn't really matter. It's a moving average. That's what matters. So because this was a higher low, that does indicate that this was not actually a bear market. This was the start of a bull market. So it popped below the yellow line, but then took off to the upside, okay? So in 2017, you guys can see many, many times here throughout the bull cycle, this thing did actually retest and even come slightly below the yellow EMA. So just because the point I'm trying to make here is just because we get a dip below the yellow EMA does not necessarily mean that the bull market's over, okay? So there's your bear market low in 2018. And then we came up for this mini bull run. And then we had a dip below the yellow EMA for some time. Okay. And then went back up and then had the pandemic crash and it dipped below again and then took off for a bull run. But even with this pandemic low here, this was still technically a higher low. The true low of the bear market was back here. Okay. And then we took off and then the lines crossed and then we had our bear market. So we had this low here, Okay, this was the bear market low. Then we had a little fake out dip down here. This was a higher low. And then we're now having another fake out dip below here. In my opinion, I think it's a fake out low. And this is going to be a higher low, which will ultimately lead to a higher price. So as far as I'm concerned, it still looks bullish in my opinion. So let's go ahead and get into the charts now. And I'm going to show you guys on the higher time frames what I'm talking about in terms of structure. So basically what I'm looking for here, okay? So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of circle this. So this is a structure level. This is a structure level. This, once we get above it, is a structure level, okay? So basically what this refers to when I say structure level is it refers to a flip zone, okay? So a flip zone is basically going from resistance, in this case, as you can see here, into support, resistance, then into support, and then theoretically when we break out above 75,000 and close above the zone, this would become resistance, turn into support. That's what's known as structure. In order for this to become a bear trend, what we would need to see happen, which I'm not saying this is going to happen, we would have to get a close, some kind of candle close, probably starting below here, okay? So starting below 48,000, that would be indicative potentially of a change in trend, all right? So we got below here, but once again, basically getting below here would indicate a change in trend, but not necessarily a bear market. So if we got below, in my opinion, 40,000, I think that could potentially spell the start of a bear market, because again, if we get below this lower white line here, that would obviously be the monthly trend line, which I'll go over with you guys right now. We'll start on that time frame. As you guys can see, the bull market trend started here on the monthly time frame, and if we get below that, that probably most likely is going to equal a bear market. But in my opinion, I don't think that's going to happen. So as you guys can see, something very similar happened here in Bitcoin's previous cycle, but the difference is that Bitcoin topped out in November of the year following the halving. Okay, we're still in the year of the halving. So technically, Bitcoin should not be topping out for another roughly year and 4 months. So I think likely what could happen is maybe we come down, test this zone, 48 to 52,000, then bounce, or maybe even come down and test this zone at 40 to 44,000 as kind of like the floor, so to speak. And then we have our second leg up closer towards the end of the year. We could also kind of wedge in between this flat top and this rising trend line here, which is also known as a ascending triangle. That's a bullish pattern, and then eventually break out towards the end of the year, which again, end of the year, there's a lot of major economic events taking place and potential Fed rate cuts. So I assume that's likely when we're probably eventually going to see the bounce. So this monthly candle has not actually closed below these monthly candles yet. If that happens, obviously that would not be good. So I've already told you guys what the levels are that we're looking at here. So weekly candle, this is a 2-week candle. So 2-week candle still has some time to close. If we get a close below 62,500, we'll just have to wait and see if it goes lower or not. But technically speaking, if I saw that, that would indicate to me potentially this thing is going lower. So now we'll go down to the weekly time frame. So weekly time frame. So you guys can see that we got to close this big fat red candle here. Okay, close below these lows. That indicates a bearish move. So 61,500 is what we had to hold. We got below it. Now we're trying to push back up. And I'll show you guys in a minute what I'm looking for a reversal here. It could bounce on these wicks at the bottom of this flag where we currently sit, and then go up and test the top of the flag. That's possible. I don't usually measure flag moves by the wicks, but in this case, it did bounce. So there is that. The levels that I'm looking for bounce areas, just so you all know, is basically these two zones right here. So 48,000 to 51,000. As you guys can see, the red EMA on the weekly is around that area. And then 40,000 to 44,000 is kind of like the max pain scenario, where I don't think it's going to go any lower than that. But if it does, well, I'm not going to say if it does, but I don't think it goes any lower than that. I think that's ultimately where we bounce. So to give you guys an indication of what that would look like, so if we go down to, let's say, the bottom of this first range from the peak, that's a 35% pullback in Bitcoin. Let's say maybe we get out here somewhere in November before Bitcoin starts taking off. So roughly about the top of this range, and also kind of where that trend line is. Again, max pain scenario, that would be about a minus 41% drop on Bitcoin. And then it takes off to the upside towards the end of the year. So that would, in my opinion, that would be the worst case scenario. So let's now go to the daily time frame. So what I'm looking for is a bounce off of either 44 to 48,000 or 40,000 to 44,000. So 40 to 44,000. Oh, my bad. 48 to 52,000. So those are kind of the levels we're looking at. Also a potential golden cross on the daily time frame. Told you all about this before. So if we get one of those, likely that's going to indicate potentially an early change in trend. So we got one back here, and then we got one here. And then if I go back even further, you can see the last one we got before that, which was only the third one since the most recent one was at 28,000. That was back in October of last year. So they're pretty rare occurrences. I've actually decided to change my mind from the daily time frame golden cross to the 4-hourly time frame golden cross. Reason being is the daily takes a long time to play out, and the 4-hourly is still pretty rare. So you can see we're just starting to get one here. That's a good sign. We got one here before in June, but it was a fake out, and then we had a bigger sell-off. So if I go up even further, you guys can see our first death cross here, got a golden cross here, then went back up, but then of course it was another fake out. So golden cross here back in May, and then the death cross, golden cross. You can see, relatively speaking, they're actually quite rare. So only about a handful of them in the last like 4 months. So basically, kind of what I'm planning on doing is picking up a lot of crypto when we get these golden crosses, and then if it dumps again, just simply stop buying, because I could just DCA down, but then if I DCA down, there's a risk it could just keep dumping. Okay. And there's plenty of money that we have to be able to put into this thing. But at the same time, if it just keeps on dumping, we just keep trying to catch a falling knife. If you guys have been in trading, you understand what that means. But we're kind of looking for a 4-hourly golden cross, and then it keeps going up, and then we get this kind of daily golden cross. And then, by the time it even gets the daily golden cross, we're already starting to buy. And then if this is the bottom, then we got in early on the bottom because we were looking at a lower time frame golden cross, which then ended up turning into a higher time frame golden cross. One of the benefits of being a trader and an analyst. So that's pretty much the game plan. So starting tomorrow, I'm going to set a certain amount of money into native cryptocurrencies. At some point, may get back into the Grayscale Trust and the Bitcoin miners. But again, before we even think about doing that, we got to see some kind of bottom here on Bitcoin. So anyways, hope you all enjoyed this content. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see y'all later. Peace.